They traded her life for a bottle of wine and a jug of goat's milk, then called it charity. This isn't just another Western story. This is a brutal reminder that some men still believe a woman in a wheelchair is worth less than a warm drink. In a land scorched by heat and silence, where power hides behind badges and fake smiles, a girl named Mira was tossed aside by the very man who should have protected her father, a crooked judge. He didn't just abandon her. He sold her. And the price? One bottle of red wine? One jug of goat's milk? He thought it was a joke. He thought she'd die quietly. He thought the rancher would use her and throw her out with the scraps. But Jonah Rourke, scarred by war, widowed by fire, and silent for years, didn't laugh. He saw something no one else did, a soul that hadn't given up, even when her body failed her. Before we begin, hit like if you think no human being should be discarded like trash. Comment 1 if you believe dignity costs more than a bottle of wine. And don't forget to subscribe, because what happens at the end will shock you. Trust me. This isn't just about Mira. It's about every woman silenced, traded, or shamed for simply surviving. And by the time you finish this video, you'll understand why some names are chosen, not inherited, and why this story had to be told. Das. Jonah didn't speak a word as he loaded Mira into the back of his wagon. The wind had shifted that evening, dry, restless, and strange, like the land itself knew something wasn't right. He laid her gently onto a bundle of hay wrapped in a canvas tarp. Not because she asked, but because she deserved more than the wooden floor of that wagon. Her father, Judge Marrow, had laughed as he handed Jonah the bottle of cheap red and a jug of goat's milk, like it was a game, like Mira was a bet in a poker round he already won. She's your problem now, the judge had said. But Jonah never played games. Not since the day the fire took everything. Mira said nothing on the ride. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. But Jonah could feel it. Her silence wasn't empty. It was full of held screams, shame beaten into her bones, and a steel dignity she refused to show unless it mattered. The kind of silence that weighs more than words ever could. At the cabin, Jonah didn't offer sympathy. He offered structure. He built a ramp that same night, working in the dark by lantern, his bad knees stiff and throbbing, but he didn't stop. By sunrise, Mira could move freely without asking, without waiting. And that's when something shifted. Not in her spine, in her eyes. But just as the days began to take shape, the whispers started. From town. From men who had grinned when she was traded. She's not a wife, they said. She's a burden. Oh, she can't even walk. She can't even please him. What they couldn't see, what they refused to see, was that Jonah hadn't taken Mira in to fix her. He'd taken her in because he knew what it meant to be left behind. The battlefield and the funeral pyre had both taught him one thing. Some people survive not because they're strong, but because they don't know how to give up. Mira wasn't helpless. She was dangerous. Because she saw the truth and still chose to stay alive. That night, as Jonah worked quietly at the edge of the fence line, repairing a post that had rotted at the base, Mira wheeled herself to the porch and watched him. "You think I'm weak," she said suddenly. Her voice cracked slightly, but not from fear, from fury. "You think I'm here because you pity me?" Jonah didn't stop working. He only glanced up once, eyes steady under the brim of his hat. "No," he said. "I think you're the first person I've met who didn't run when the fire came." "I'm so—" She didn't reply, but her hands stopped trembling. That night, she didn't dream of falling. She dreamed of standing. If this moment shook something in you, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or discarded, comment, stand below, and hit subscribe. If you didn't feel anything, then maybe hit like out of curiosity for what's coming next. Because in the next part, someone returns, and they're not ready for the woman Mira is becoming. R-double. The rain arrived without warning. It came hard and fast one afternoon, sweeping across the dry land like punishment. Thunder cracked like gunfire, and the wind bent the cottonwoods until their roots groaned. Jonah had just finished bracing the east fence line when the downpour hit, soaking him to the bone. He limped toward the cabin, coat heavy with mud, vision blurred, every muscle screaming from cold and memory. Inside, Mira had already moved into action, without waiting, without asking. She had dragged a bucket to the door, laid out dry cloth on the bench, and stoked the fire high enough to drive out the damp. Her hands, still scarred at the knuckles, moved with certainty. Not quick, not graceful, but deliberate. When Jonah stepped inside, dripping like a drowned dog, she handed him a towel. "You forgot your hat," she said, voice flat, but not unkind. "You forget a lot of things when you've been wet this many years," he muttered. They didn't speak for a while after that. The storm was speaking loud enough. She made stew from what was left in the jar. Wild carrots, salted pork, 2 pieces of hard potato that refused to soften. They ate on the floor, by the hearth. Mira couldn't sit cross-legged, not with her lower half locked by nerve and time. But she leaned back on one arm and let the fire warm the soles of her feet, still pale and thin but no longer lifeless. That night, as the wind howled and the tin roof shook, Mira turned to Jonah and asked the question she'd swallowed for weeks. "Did you take me in because you were lonely? Or because you thought I couldn't run away?" Jonah didn't answer right away. He rubbed his palms together, leaned forward, and stared into the flame. "I took you in because no one else did," he said finally. "And because I saw the way you didn't cry when your father left. You think that makes me strong? I think that makes you dangerous." Mira stared at him, unsure whether to feel insulted or honored. Then she laughed. Quiet. Bitter. "You don't know the half of it." He turned. "Then tell me." She didn't. Not then. The next morning, the air smelled different, like broken pine and wet rust. Jonah saddled the mule and rode out to check the northern pass, leaving Mira to tend the fire and sort the pantry. But around noon, as she was reaching for a sack of dried beans, the latch on the door shifted. It creaked. Once. She froze. Her hands curled tight around the shelf edge. Jonah wouldn't be back yet. Not until sundown. Then the door opened. 2 men stood in the frame. One she didn't know, young, filthy, eyes red with drink. The other she would have known even in the dark. Judge Silas Merrow. Her father. He stepped in without asking, shaking water from his coat like a dog. "Well, I see you're still breathing," he said, tone casual, cruel. Mira didn't move. She couldn't. The other man probably hired muscle, snickered and walked in behind, bootsteps loud on the wood floor. "We came to check in," the judge said. "See if the wine was worth it." Mira's chest rose, shallow and sharp. "You left me here like garbage." "I gave you a home," he snapped, voice rising. "Better than you deserved after what you did." "What I did?" Her voice cracked. "You embarrassed me. You ruined my name. And now you're letting that cripple farmer climb on top of you like some—" "Shut your mouth." A third voice interrupted. It came from the doorway. Jonah. Soaked again, rifle in hand, his eyes darker than the storm clouds still dragging across the ridge behind him. The judge turned, startled. But Jonah didn't raise the rifle. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes could have burned wood. "You've got 5 seconds," Jonah said, "to walk back out that door and never show your face again." The drunk moved first, muttering something and backing out like a coward. The judge, slower, clenched his jaw and glared at Mira like she'd betrayed something sacred. "You stay here, you de here," he hissed. She wheeled forward, steady. "Then I die standing." Jonah didn't flinch. He stepped forward, hand brushing the top of Mira's shoulder, not to claim her, but to stand with her. And in that moment, the rain stopped. But the fury had just begun. The silence that followed the judge's departure was unlike any silence before. It wasn't peaceful. It was acidic. The kind that hangs in the walls, in the corners of your breath, long after the threat is gone. Mira didn't speak for the rest of that day. She sat by the window, her hands still clenched in her lap, eyes fixed on the path where her father had disappeared. Jonah didn't ask questions. He chopped wood until his palms blistered. He repaired a post that didn't need repairing. He wiped down a rifle that hadn't been fired in years. There were no words that could fix what had just happened. So he let her have the quiet and guarded it like it was sacred. But that night, Mira broke it herself. "He used to say my spine broke because I was weak," she said, voice low and tight. "Like my body betrayed him, as if I got paralyzed on purpose. He called it punishment, said God was correcting a mistake." Jonah didn't interrupt. He sat across from her, boots off, sleeves rolled to the elbows, staring into the fire like it might offer some justice. Mira's voice cracked. I wasn't supposed to survive the fever. When I did, he told me not to speak of it, that no man would want a crippled daughter, that I was lucky he kept me hidden. Jonah looked at her, then not with pity, but something colder. Righteous anger. The kind that doesn't boil. It sears. Next time, he said. I won't wait for him to speak first. Mira didn't thank him. She just nodded once. And in that motion, something passed between them, an understanding deeper than defense. She didn't need rescuing. She needed someone who wouldn't let the world reduce her to silence again. The following week, Jonah brought her outside. It was the first time since the confrontation. He had built a small garden bed at the back of the cabin, close to the shed, raised high enough for her to reach without strain. He said nothing as she wheeled up beside it. Inside the box, soil turned fresh, seeds lined up in hand, written paper sleeves, and a small trowel with a carved wooden handle. What is this? She asked. He shrugged. Something to grow. I thought you didn't believe in futures. I don't, Jonah said. But I believe in choices. She stared at the bed for a long while before digging in. She planted carrots first, then onion, then a few herbs she didn't even recognize. The sun hit her face differently that day. Not softer, clearer, like it finally knew who it was shining on. By the third morning, she had taken over half the porch with jars, cloths, drying herbs, sharpened knives, lists. She cleaned the pantry, she sorted ammunition. She even sharpened Jonah's razors without asking, not because she wanted thanks, but because this was her home now. 2. And Jonah, true to form, didn't say a word. But when he poured 2 cups of coffee instead of 1, left her chair beside the fire without comment, she knew. Still, the town didn't forget. People came. First a few, then more. Men on horseback who paused at the fence too long. A woman at the trading post who refused to sell Mira cloth unless Jonah stepped in. Even the preacher from the valley came by and suggested Mira be placed somewhere more suited for her condition. Jonah didn't speak to them. He just started sleeping with the rifle closer. But Mira, she was done being silent. One morning, she rode into town herself. She strapped herself into the wagon, hitched the mule, and drove it alone for 2 miles of cracked dust and stone. She didn't ask permission. She didn't leave a note. She wheeled into the general store like a damn storm. Asked for cloth, tobacco, soap, and bullets. When the man behind the counter said they didn't serve unaccompanied girls in chairs, she pulled out Jonah's old revolver and laid it flat on the counter. I'm not unaccompanied, she said. I just walk different now. She left with every item she needed and the respect of a few who saw something they hadn't dared admit. The girl wasn't broken. She was armed, with memory, with rage, with presence. When she returned, Jonah didn't scold her. He just unloaded the supplies and asked what she wanted for supper. She smirked. Something spicy. I'm tired of being soft. That night, they ate in the open air, under a purple sky humming with cicadas. Jonah lit a lantern. Mira poured the tea. They didn't toast. They didn't smile. But when a single rabbit crept out of the brush to sniff near the garden bed and Mira whispered, "See? Even they know it's safe here now." Jonah just nodded, because safety, out there, was a lie. But in this place, between a ramp, a rifle, and a raised garden bed, a woman who'd been sold for wine was learning to grow her own fire. And no man judge or preacher or coward would ever bury that again. By early fall, the garden had started to bloom in earnest. Mira harvested the first carrots with dirt still clinging to their orange skin and set them on the windowsill like small trophies. Jonah added new boards to the fence, carved notches into the posts to mark the days she'd lived there each one. A quiet defiance against what the world had once deemed impossible. But just as they began to build a rhythm that felt almost like peace, something broke that rhythm. Jonah woke one night to the sound of hammering, steady, rhythmic, too precise for the wind. He grabbed his rifle and stepped outside. There, beneath a sliver of moonlight, was Mira. In her lap, a hammer. Beside her, a long, narrow pine board, and on it, the beginnings of a sign. She didn't look up. You said this place didn't have a name. she said, her voice calm but electric. He blinked. What are you calling it? She lifted the half-carved plank. One word, burned deep into the wood. Spine. Jonah stared at the letters, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Mira looked him in the eye. Because it's what they said I lost. But it's the only thing I have left that won't break. He nodded once. Walked back inside. Didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, the preacher returned this time with a letter. A folded, embossed summons from Judge Silas Marrow himself. Mira was being ordered to return to town for restitution proceedings. On paper, it sounded legal. In spirit, it was retaliation. Jonah read the letter 3 times before setting it on fire without a word. Mira didn't flinch. She simply picked up her carving knife and returned to her sign. But the threat wasn't just legal. It was coming. That evening, Jonah loaded the wagon with food, ammo, water, not to run but to prepare. He'd been through this before. War doesn't always announce itself with soldiers. Sometimes it wears robes. Sometimes it rides in under the name of law. Still, Mira refused to leave. I ran once, she said. When the fever hit, when the cane snapped, when the town looked away. I ran so much, I forgot what it felt like to stay still and fight. Jonah said nothing. Just handed her a tin of bullets. That night, Mira wheeled herself to the edge of the property. She waited in the dark, hand resting not on a weapon, but on the edge of the spine sign now planted in the dirt. The moon was full. The wind cold. And in the distance, hooves. 3 horses. When they arrived, no one shouted. No shots were fired. The men dismounted like vultures, cautious, calculating. At their center, the judge himself, dressed in black. Face pinched with the rage of someone who lost control. Mira, he called out, stepping forward. This is your last chance. She rolled closer, her voice like flint. To what? Be your shame again? He glanced toward Jonah, who now stood on the porch, rifle at the ready. You're being kept like a prisoner. I'm not kept, she snapped. I chose to stay. Something you never gave me the dignity to do. The judge raised a hand, signaling the man on the left to step forward. He was younger, smug, cocky, probably a deputy from town. He took one step, and then everything happened at once. The rabbit from Mira's garden darted across the yard, startled. The young deputy spooked, reached for his holster, and Jonah fired a warning shot into the air. The noise echoed like judgment from the heavens. You take one more step, Jonah said, and I'll make you wish you were deaf. The judge's face twisted with fury, but he hesitated. You think this ends here? No, Mira said coldly. It ends with you. Then, she pulled something from under her lap blanket, a legal document, notarized and stamped, that she had drawn up the week before with the help of a merchant's wife. It declared her emancipation, her medical records, and her legal claim to the land Jonah had given her rights to. The judge's face turned a shade darker. You think paper can stop me? No, Mira said. But the world will see what you tried to erase. The judge's mouth tightened. He turned to leave, but not before spitting into the dust near her wheel. You're not my daughter, she smiled. That's the first true thing you've ever said. And with that, they wrote off no glory, no vengeance. Just the bitter retreat of cowards, outmatched by dignity. That night, Mira repainted the sign with red earth and pine ash. Jonah sat beside her, handing her the brush when her hand trembled. They didn't talk about winning. They didn't talk about fear. They only talked about planting winter seeds. Because this land, this cabin, this name, this spine was no longer a place of escape. It was a line drawn. If this moment hit you like thunder, let us know. Comment I see her if you believe no woman should ever have to prove her worth twice. And hit subscribe because the final chapter of this story will break something open in you that you didn't know was buried. I Midas. The first snow came early. It powdered the roof like sifted sugar, quiet and cruel. The garden was now a bed of frozen memories, and Mira spent most mornings by the stove, rubbing her hands near the cast-iron kettle. Her joints ached more these days. Her breath clouded in the kitchen air. Jonah, as always, prepared in silence. He patched the window panes, reinforced the door, and chopped enough firewood for a siege. But it wasn't just winter they were bracing for. It was the weight of what wouldn't die. 3 nights after the judge's retreat, a package appeared on their porch. No note. Just a stained burlap sack tied tight with rusted wire. Jonah opened it with a hunting knife. Inside, a child's doll split at the spine, legs broken, and scrawled across the chest in charcoal. Still worthless. Mira said nothing. She only stared at it, eyes dry, fingers twitching like she might crush it with thought alone. Jonah threw the doll into the stove, but the words still burned. A week later, she bled. It was slight, barely more than a drop. But Mira knew. She'd felt the nausea, the dizziness, the faint flutter under the ribs that couldn't be explained by fear. She didn't tell Jonah right away, not because she was afraid, but because she needed to decide. Was this a curse from the past? Or a beginning she could claim for herself? When she finally told him, it was not in words. She handed him the scarf she'd used to clean the blood, folded neatly, with a single sprig of dried rosemary on top. Jonah looked at her, confused. Is this? She nodded. He sat down slowly, like the earth had tilted. His voice cracked. Are you okay? I don't know, she whispered. But I don't want to be afraid of it. From that moment on, the house changed. Jonah built a cradle, though neither of them spoke of it out loud. Mira began singing soft tunes she barely remembered from childhood, but they flowed from her now, like water from thawed ground. She stitched baby linens from leftover feed sacks, painted the inner walls with ochre and ash. Every corner became a promise, a defense, a prayer. But word travels in cold wind, and someone, maybe a hired ear, maybe a spiteful neighbor, let slip that the judge had a bastard grandchild on the way. That night, someone tried to burn down the barn. Jonah woke to smoke. He put it out with his coat, his hands, and his fury. Mira came outside, watching the embers hiss against the snow. She didn't speak. She only placed one hand on her belly, then walked back inside. They knew what was coming next, so they prepared for war. Not with guns, but with truth. Jonah sent a letter to a war buddy in Helena, now a lawyer. Attached to it were testimonies, signed affidavits from local women. Mira had quietly helped over the past month those abused, silenced, or nearly sold like she had been. The lawyer agreed to file a formal case, not only for land ownership, but for civil standing and guardianship rights, naming Mira as a legal protector for victims of rural exploitation. Her name, once erased, was now on legal documents as Mira Rourke. Not by birth, not by force, by choice. And when the final snow melted, the cabin no longer looked like a hiding place. It looked like a stronghold. This story teaches us that dignity is not something others give you, it's something you reclaim, inch by inch, even after the world throws you away. Mira, once sold like a burden, stood tall without standing at all. She turned silence into strength, pain into purpose, and a broken body into an unshakable voice. Her journey reminds us that healing doesn't always look loud sometimes. It's a garden in winter, a cradle built in defiance, or a name carved in wood. True worth isn't proven through walking, it's proven through refusing to be erased. And that is the real revolution.